some of the introductions to begin with. And just for those of you who don't know me, my name is Elspeth Brown. I'm the director of the Digital Humanities Network, and I'm also a faculty member in history and historical studies at U of T. So Andrew, maybe you want to share with us what today will be looking like.
Sure. Yeah. So as you will all have seen, the topic of today's event is how to build and maintain a DH project, and we're really interested in sort of getting into the kind of nitty-gritty of staffing, training, project organization, these sorts of things that presumably everybody in this room has some interest in and potentially some experience with, and really just try to share some notes, share strategies, and go forward from there. So in terms of the introductions, or in terms of the agenda rather, Elspeth will start with the introductions. We'll have presentations from speakers about 3 different current U of T projects. Then I think right after that we will split off into Zoom's breakout rooms, which some of you may be increasingly familiar with now that we all live on Zoom. So while folks are presenting, I'll be sort of diligently sorting you all into small groups. We will break off into those for about 20 minutes, and I'll give you some questions that you might want to consider along with everything that we'll have just heard from the speakers. And then we will all come back together for a general discussion. I might ask each group just to share very briefly a little bit about what was said, but then the goal is really just to get us back to kind of a full open discussion, which I will moderate. And we'll just kind of carry forward from there and wrap up as we kind of lose steam. Because I know everybody's spending their days on Zoom, and we'll need the breaks we can get. So.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. So why don't we go ahead and then get started? And I'd like to start with an acknowledging that this land on which the University of Toronto operates, and which presumably we all are, for thousands of years it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. And today, our meeting places here are still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're very grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land and to be in the homes or the other locations where we might be to have this lightning lunch, presuming it's here in Toronto. So let me go ahead and introduce our 4 speakers actually. 2 of them are part of the same project and will be co-presenting. And that is, that first group will be Nicholas Terpstra, who is a professor of history at the University of Toronto, and he's currently working on expanding a digital map of 16th century Florence as the principal investigator of a project known as Decima. Is it Decima or Decima? I always get it mixed up.
Actually, Decima.
Decima, sorry. My Italian is terrible. In fact, I have none of that, by the way. Decima, the digitally encoded census information and mapping archive, and that's the main project that Nick and Colin will be discussing. And Colin is an assistant professor of history at Brock University. He employs historical mapping tools to trace the geospatial patterns of violence in around Bologna and to track the social and economic makeup of the population of Florence in the 16th and 17th centuries. And with Nick, he's the co-principal investigator of the project. Our next project/speaker will be Kristen Boss, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto and is also the lab manager of the Techno-Science Research Unit, or TRU. Kristen is an Indigenous feminist researcher trained in archaeological approaches to material culture, as well as in Indigenous science and technology studies. She's an STS researcher who is concerned with the relationship between colonial, gendered, and environmental violence. And so Kristen will be talking about, I think, how the Techno-Science Research Unit is organized and how it functions. A great mystery that I've always wanted to know more about, so perfect. Pamela Klassen is joining us today as well. She's a professor in the Department for the Study of Religion at the University of Toronto with a cross-appointment in anthropology. And her work engages with media and print cultural studies, Indigenous studies, museum studies, legal studies, digital humanities, and the history and anthropology of medicine. She is the project director for the Kinawawan Cowan-Dawaman, I'm sorry, I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, Story Nations, which is an interactive companion website to her book, the story of Radio Mind. And apologies for probably mangling the name of the project, and I hope Pamela will correct me when the time comes. Okay, so without further ado, let me turn it over to Nick.
Okay, thanks, Elspeth, and thanks to everybody for being part of this. I'll just, Colin and I will just talk briefly about how we've organized DHN, where it came from, and then some of the questions that Andrew had sent around earlier about hard lessons, gig economy, and research and the rest. So the first thing is the question around how the team is organized in terms of staffing and all the rest. Maybe I should just say briefly the purpose behind the DHN project is to take the social, historical, and economic data from a mid-16th century tax census of the city of Florence, and then put that into a database and then georeference it to a contemporary map, a 1586 map of the city, so that you can actually visualize the data. And what we're trying to do now, the first stage of the project, you could almost really count it in terms of different SSHRC grants that it's been under. So the first stage of the project was doing that first set of data, working with 5 volumes of tax records. And then the second stage, for a single tax from mid-16th century, second stage was expanding it to include 2 other censuses. And the third stage we're involved in right now is moving into a different city entirely and trying to do some of the same kinds of things with that different city. There's key differences about it. So really what we needed to do initially, so this is one of these things that really kind of grew organically, which is to say it wasn't organized. And its organization has continued to grow organically, which means that it doesn't really follow any particular org chart that I can make out. But what we needed to do in the first stage is find the data and then take the data and get it into a database. And so if Colin hadn't been there at the beginning, the 2 of us working together, but really Colin doing the work about understanding and being able to organize what was possible, the rest of the project wouldn't have happened. So while he was doing the research on the technology we needed, I was trying to find the funding, and then we were both together trying to find the people. And what we needed in this first stage was people who could actually read 16th century hands. So the early group of TA, or the early group of research assistants, there were a few undergraduates, but really the first group really came out of places like the Center for Medieval Studies. And in the first stage of research, because we had these fairly important, there were the technical needs on the side of, say, the digital humanities, but there were also the technical needs on the side of reading manuscripts. And so that's why it came together in a really, I think, very good way. Again, we in that early stage of functioning, say I might have been the PI, but Colin was really the lead RA. And then we had a person one of the RAs, from CMS, who emerged as also important to the project, Daniel Jameson. And in the current iteration, as we moved forward, say after the first stage, we moved where I was the lead PI. We moved in the second stage into more a co-PI situation, and we were both then supervising in different ways the work of these different research assistants, some of them doing technical work, some of them still doing the data transcription. And by that point then, Colin also was able to land a job at Brock. So as we moved into the third stage, Daniel Jameson is now a postdoc working with us, and he is now training some of the research assistants who are working on the data recovery from this other city called Livorno, which is a coastal city in Tuscany. So it's really emerged in that way, in part because of the needs of financing, in part also because of my own. I am very quick to acknowledge my limits technologically. And also I was chairing a department at that point, so I really didn't have as much time to do some of the immediate work. but it also seemed like the best way to actually see the work evolve. And the other side of it that has been part of this is that we've tried to evolve it in relation to outside collaborators or outside colleagues. And that's allowed us to then develop a network, which I think has been helpful for a number of the research assistants as well. They were able to then work collaboratively with other historians of Renaissance Florence. And so why don't I leave it there, and Colin, maybe you want to fill in on parts that I may have missed. He's got the data, the organizational chart there too.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys managed to see that on my screen. I'll point out, Nick says he was chairing a department at the time. I'll point out that Nick has been continuously chairing various departments from 2011 to now, with the exception of a sabbatical. So he's managed to sort of direct this project from a position of extreme busyness the entire time. I think he's done a pretty good job discussing our organizational structure and how we're set up. I'll simply add that it's always been very much a collaborative training exercise for graduate and undergraduate students. Since we began it, it was initially both digital and paleographical training for me and the other group of graduate RAs that we had back then, as well as since then it's provided various kinds of digital and archival training for a sort of rotating cast of characters. I think that's all we want to say about the organization and staffing of the project. So next, we were asked to talk about some of the hard lessons that we've learned, and there's two that really stick out to me that we have faced repeatedly. Some of which we continue to learn, and not because we do it better anytime, but because we continue to run up against the same issues. The first one, and this is particular for those of you who are thinking about beginning a DH project, particularly one that's going to be team-based and collaborative, is to consider tech as a core membership element of your project. We initially began DHN and have largely continued on in the mode of thinking that tech is something that can and should be done by the humanist researchers, and that would provide the interdisciplinary DH credibility. What I've learned over and over again is that interdisciplinarity in digital humanities does not mean one kind of scholar performing multiple disciplines, but actually that it's disciplinary collaboration between members of a diverse set of skills and ways of thinking and ways of producing research. So the big lesson that I've said this to many people before starting up DH projects, consider tech as a core membership of your team from the get-go. That means having dedicated expertise to whatever the technical needs are of your project, in addition to trying to pick up as much of those skills as you and your researchers can at the same time. Because I've learned, GIS and a little bit of 3D modeling and various forms of data analysis and visualization, a bit of Python here, a bit of R there along the way, but in no ways have I found that's a sufficient replacement for dedicated expertise. My expertise remains as a historian, not as a Python coder or a web developer or a GIS cartographer, although I would say that I've picked up enough GIS cartography to call myself pretty good at it. So that's one lesson, is that tech is a real member of your project, not auxiliary. The other lesson that I've learned, particularly from working in 2 university environments over 3 grant cycles now, maybe three, right, Nick? 3 grant cycles, is that your research labor is always going to be transitory. Of the initial 7 who started DHN, 3 of us remain, and that's only because of Nick's ability to continue drumming up funding. After the initial set of PhD graduate RAs finished their PhDs in good time, it was very difficult for several years to drum up interest among incoming graduate students or existing graduate students in joining the team. It was hard to make the case. For the earlier group of us, we were all building something together, and that was exciting, and there was this initial spurt of vitality around it. Once several of them graduated, bringing in new people with the same kind of enthusiasm was difficult, and it became quite a task to find researchers who would sustain the pace that we had set in the first 4 or 5 years of research. A lot of that had to do perhaps with granting cycles and the contingent nature of the work that we were offering, particularly our second stage of grants. A lot of the budget was dedicated towards a postdoc, which didn't leave much money for the graduate and undergraduate researchers. And so staffing the sort of the day-to-day research of the project became difficult, which leads me into the third question that we were posed, dealing with concerns about precarious employment and contingency and the gig economy. That's always been, as I've just sort of alluded to, that people have moved through this project, and that it has always been, kind of a side gig for a lot of graduate researchers. That has been enabled by the continuous drumming up of funds from wherever you can find them. This is very much Nick's expertise and not mine. He's the grant-getting guru of this project. That's especially been the case with our current postdoc, Dan Jameson, who initially started as a Shirk postdoc, and then solely in order to continue drumming up postdoc funds for him, Nick agreed to and then extended his term as interim chair of another department on campus, with the condition that there would be funding attached for a DHN postdoc. One of the ways that we've tried to use DHN to help students prepare themselves for and navigate the current precarious work economy of the academy is to present DHN research work to them as a path to different employment opportunities, be they academic or be they outside of the academy. Certainly in my case, this was my idea from the first year of my PhD when we first started talking about DHN, that this was going to get me a professorship far more than was my archival work in 16th century Italy. And that indeed was the case. In the end, my position is as assistant professor of European and digital history, and my job very much is a result of my work with this project. We have tried to make that case to incoming graduate students for several years now, with various degrees of success. Usually what we've found is that in year 5 of their PhD, when they start looking at the job market, after years of kind of putting us off and saying they'd rather concentrate on their archival work, in year 5 they decide that maybe there is something to this when they see that there's 5 times as many digital history jobs as non-digital history jobs out there. So we've tried to make DHN an opportunity for graduate students to prepare themselves for and perhaps navigate the precarious gig economy that is the modern academy. And we've had varied success doing that. And that leads us back to our final question with Professor Terpstra.
I think we might be, just to interrupt, I'm sorry, but just being aware of the time that we might want to move on. Nick, do you want to, I don't want to cut you off though. Is there something succinct that you might want to contribute just to conclude?
I was just going to add to that, it has been successful. We've had a couple of dozen people involved as research assistants, sometimes for longer periods, sometimes for shorter periods. And at least 3 of them have gotten tenure track positions out of it. So it has been, at a certain level, it has been productive. And I mention that simply because in each one of those cases, the position they got was one where their digital expertise actually did help them land the job. But I'll pass on then to the others, to Kristen.
Oh, thank you so much, both of you. It's really given us a lot to think about, and we can discuss shortly. But before we do that, let's hear from Kristen.
Sure. I'm going to share some of my screen too, or I'll just introduce myself. So, hey, my name is Kristen Boss, and I am an urban Métis feminist. I'm a PhD candidate here at the University of Toronto, and I have been the acting lab manager at the Technoscience Research Unit, or the TRU as I'm going to call it, or the TRU, at U of T. And who we are, what we do. So we are a cross-disciplinary hub for what we call like creative research on technoscience. And we draw particular strength in science and technology studies, Indigenous science and technology studies, environmental justice, data justice, and then decolonial, anti-racist, feminist, STS. And as a group, we are composed of postdoctoral fellows, research fellows, a lab manager, who's myself, graduate students, community members, artists, and affiliated faculty. We are really from a really diverse backgrounds and locations in terms of what we study, but we do bring a similar ethic to the research. And so we do lots of justice-oriented research. And so our main research project is called Visualizing Colonial Violence, the Land and the Refinery. And the co-lead on that project and the director of the Technoscience Research Unit is Michelle Murphy. And then the other co-lead is Vanessa Gray. And Vanessa Gray is Anishinaabe Kwe from Aamjiwnaang First Nation. And Aamjiwnaang First Nation is in Chemical Valley, where 40% of Canada's petrochemicals get processed. And so we're looking at environmental data justice there, like what's getting polluted, how much is getting polluted, where is it going, and how can we story that using data visualizations. We recently made an app called Pollution Reporter that helps folks on the ground report pollution to the Ministry of the Environment, as well as connects pollution data from a national data set to peer-reviewed health data in accessible translated words. And so that's kind of our main project, but we do have many projects within us too. And so let me just look at the questions. Oh yeah, so as I said, lots of folks in the lab. And so how this works is we're working on a new organizational chart because we are not a horizontal space. There are levels of hierarchy in it, especially when it comes to writing grants, doing funding, that sort of stuff. But we have, but we all work together. So we do, we are in relation to each other as collaborators and as co-conspirators, which is what we like to say. And so we have the director of the Technoscience Research Unit, Michelle Murphy. Then we have myself, who's the lab manager, so overseeing administrative duties, that sort of thing. And then we have research assistants. Right now we have 3 research assistants. Vanessa, environmental data justice. We have Rena Shaddan doing data justice. And then we have Shaq helping us with the back end of our app as well. And then our membership is many different people. So graduate students, postdocs, affiliated faculty. And how it works to join our lab is you fill out an application online and you'll then go through an onboarding process. So there's a number of questions that need to get filled out. We are a space for Black, Indigenous, people of color in the university, and so we are creating, and queer, trans, two-spirit, and non-binary folks, so we are really interested in maintaining the environment that we're all kind of working really hard to build. And so folks will fill out an application, answer some questions, then they'll come to the lab for a tour, and then they'll come to a lab meeting. So we have a monthly lab meeting for all lab members. And at that point, that's the space where new members can like officially join. Once everybody agrees, they'll do a research presentation, just so we are having that buy-in from the very beginning. And who reports to whom? So this is interesting, and I'm going to share with you our lab guide. So one of the really beautiful things that we have at our lab is this living lab guide that we, the living manual of our values, guidelines, and protocols. And Michelle and I started working on this in 2017, and we review it every year, sometimes a little more often than that, and we do this with the whole lab so that everybody gets a say. It's a living document. It's in a Google Doc, and so we fill it in together in suggestion mode, and then other folks will accept those suggestions, and we're always open to change. And so I'm going to share my screen to show you. Okay. All right, so this is our lab guide, and we are getting ready to post it online for everybody to see, because we do get lots of requests for it. Our most recent lab guide editing spree happened at the end of February. So lots of folks came in, and we ordered lunch, and we really got down to the nitty-gritty. And so in our lab guide, you'll find so who we are, what we do. We have a membership statement. And so you'll see lots of edits too, that like just things that we're putting a pin in to come back to later, and those will always appear in the column for adding to or accepting those changes. So really important, we have our membership statement. So who we are, what we do, the kind of space that we're trying to build together. And so part here that I'm really interested in is how a big part of when we work together is, yes, we thrive together, but we're also struggling, right? We're also struggling to build accessible spaces in the university. We're working towards justice together. We're trying to figure out what data justice looks like. We're trying to figure out what Indigenous data justice looks like. And so there's a lot of big questions all of the time. We also have a value framework. Right now, we're in the process of ordering our value framework, and this is something that's going to happen every year. And so as people come in and out of the lab, they're going to bring different things to the space. And so we're going to go over when we can next all together what's most important, but you'll see lots of different things here. Accessibility and what we understand to be accessibility, including digital accessibility, something we're working on now and something we're really inspired by Femtech Accessibility Report. Care and reciprocity, big part of doing research together, especially a big part of doing research together during COVID-19. Transparency and opacity. So previously, we did kind of imagine ourselves as being a horizontal collective, but that doesn't quite work out when there is a PI, right? When there is somebody who has to oversee the accounts. And so here we're trying to really think about what it means to engage in responsible information sharing. And this includes rights to refusals, especially around data, information, and access to all of that. We have lots here. Governance. So having a flexible structure of governance that can and will change, and that is based upon mutual understanding. As a lab in Toronto, especially as a lab of, yes, Indigenous people, but not necessarily all Indigenous people who are from Toronto, how are we going to act as stewards, guests, settlers? How are we going to engage and be responsible to treaties like the Dish with One Spoon, the Two-Row Treaty? And here We have a graduate student, Mia McKee, who's been really helpful with helping us think through governance and actually what that looks like on the ground. And so that's been really quite helpful. Yeah, sorry, I get stuck on the values. Okay, so then we have how do we work together? So how are we doing this all, especially digitally? So before we were online, we were working collectively anyways. So we were working usually Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays in our lab space around a table. Now we've moved that online, so we're still working together our same schedule, kind of the same process. Decision making, consensus again where we can. Documenting, obviously a big part of femtech ethics, making sure that everything like this lab guide is documented, all our processes, protocols. We recently have worked on our code of conduct as well as our conflict resolution. We're really lucky. I know there's questions about hard lessons, and we've had many hard lessons, but we've been really lucky in our actual space to have only needed to update our conflict resolution policy this year because we didn't really have one. It was kind of like, we'll deal with conflict when it arises. And so yeah, we got that done. And part of that too is not just conflict that could potentially happen in the lab, but conflict that's going to come from outside of the lab, especially when you're doing data justice oriented work. And so how do we navigate those relationships? So that's been really, really important. You'll see our writing, editing, and reviewing documents collectively, lots of protocols here. How have you dealt with concerns of precarious employment? So this is a big one, again, because we are a lab of a lot of diverse people. And so really tangible, we've almost always had money available for graduate students to apply to. We have a COVID-19 fund for folks to apply to if they need, to cover rent, whatever. And that's kind of just like part of the ethic. We have, what else? How have you preserved writing time? I think I covered that. And how has the project's approach to the topics of Indigenous data sovereignty or community engaged research changed since its inception? So it has changed in that 3 years ago, very new space for us to be doing together, right, as a new team. And so I'll show you how where are we? Have many PowerPoints open at all times. I had it open just a second ago. You know what, I'll show you here. Okay, so our app uses an Indigenous data justice framework. And so here, most importantly, we're guided via community permissions, leaderships, and reviews. So our project has been in consultation with Aamjiwnaang's Environmental Committee, and of course led by Vanessa Gray. All prototypes of apps, all writing that comes out of the lab goes through a process of community approval first before it sees the internet, but everybody else. A big part of the work that we do at the lab overall is reframing the research that we do towards land protection, as well as putting responsibility not on Indigenous communities, but on the state, on where the harm is coming from. And this includes calling entities like the Canadian government, the public and resource extraction industry into responsibility. We don't collect any data, so we don't do any data extraction. Rather, we use what we have, reframing it, critically analyzing the limits and the sources. So an example of this is the pollution data that we use. The pollution data that we use for the app is part of a national data set that is so inadequate. It's mostly based on indirect measures, so lots of computer simulations and not actual real amounts of pollution. And that is what the Canadian government is working with. That is what industry is providing. And so what you can actually do with this data, sure, it's not going to be 100% accurate, but what it does do is it does admit that pollution is happening. It does admit that certain amounts of certain pollutants are entering our water, air, land, bodies, etc. And so that's where we're going to take that, that data. In the app itself, where users are inputting information, we don't collect any of that. Users retain possession and control of any reports that they make, any data that they use. The bespoke data set, as well as the infrastructure of the app, it's all open source software. And then we've worked really hard to make sure that it's accessible throughout, so that not just meeting like font size and color contrast, but really thinking about language, really thinking about what it means to write about violence, to write about harm, and to do it in a way that doesn't bog people down.
Thank you so much, Kristen. This is really fabulous. If Pamela, if you are ready, we will move on. And I'm going to screen share those slides. So just give me a second here.
Maybe I'll say hello first,
yes,
so people, before you screen, or can you see me? Do you see who I am? Hi, my name is Pamela Klassen. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you so much to Kristen and Colin and Nick for getting us going. I think my team and I tried to think about an org chart, and we just couldn't figure it out, but I think Nick's works pretty well. It's a bit of a circle. I liked how the co-PIs and the community and consultants are sort of beside each other. And then my team also has a postdoc and a lot of graduate student research trainees and undergraduate and MA students. So yeah, the org chart was a real challenge. And I can see that was the case for Kristen as well. So Kinawan Kawindamoin Story Nations is a website that I've been working on with a lot of different people over the last 9 years or so, and it's very organic and it is not finished, which is one of actually the hard lessons of a website. When is it ever done? It's just such a different kind of way of working than writing an article or a book. When it's done, it's on the shelf. I mean, it may haunt you in different ways, or you may, haunt maybe isn't quite the right word, but it really is it's a hard question to know what it means to ever finish this kind of project. And I think with all of these projects, it's clear they don't necessarily finish. Kinawan Kawindamoin means stories for everybody in Anishinaabemowin, and this is a name that comes out of our longer process of working together with Kainachiwanong Historical Center. So you can go to the next slide, please. I handed over my screen sharing because I was sure I wasn't going to be able to do it. Oh, can I do it myself? Oh no, you're doing it.
Yeah, I can. I'll do it this way.
Okay. Yeah. So the next slide is great. Can you make it? Yeah. Whatever. It's well, actually, yeah, perfect. It's a website that we've been working on in conjunction with Kainachiwanong Historical Center, which is a historical center and a national historic site run by the Rainy River First Nations. So in between Fort Francis and the Rainy River is now considered by many to be the border between Canada and the United States, Minnesota and Northwestern Ontario. It's Treaty 3 territory. And so I won't get into the details of the website. You can look at it if you have time, and I'd love to hear any of your thoughts if anyone wants to share them. It is based on a diary written by a missionary who traveled there in 1898. We annotate the diary, and then it kind of expands from there. There's been many different iterations of it over the 9 years, and we keep bringing it back to the community and getting feedback and changing it and so on and so forth. I wanted to focus a little bit on the sort of infrastructural challenges and then also the funding challenges. The host now of the site, was finally migrated fully to Information and Instructional Technology Office at Arts and Science, and we're very grateful that they've been really helpful. It's based on a WordPress Genesis framework, and that is certainly one of the hardest challenges, is figuring out the nuts and bolts of literally where these things sit and what kind of a relationship does the university have to these kinds of projects. It was really important to me that this website be at the University of Toronto, be housed at the University of Toronto, because this is a relationship that I have as a researcher, but also that the university has in terms of the number of people who are engaged with this project with the Rainy River First Nations. And so it was important to me that, it not be off in some other server somewhere. We've also had a lot of support from Robarts Library. The first place it was hosted was E.J. Pratt Library at Victoria University. There's a long story there, which I won't get into. We're very grateful that they were able to host it, but it was very hard for, they took us in when no one else would have us. Let's just put it that way. So we're grateful to be over at IIT now in Arts and Science as well. Okay, next one. So this is the Kinachiwanang Historical Center. It's an amazing place. If anyone's ever been there, you will know. There's ancient burial mounds there, well tended by the current people who live there, and they've been there for since time immemorial for a very, very, very long time. The burial mounds. One of the challenges in our project is it's very the funding for Kinachiwanang is it's in a very what's the right word? Their funding is something that there are a number of different places where they seek funding for Kinachiwanang Historical Center, but it's really not something that has a lot of predictability to it. And so there have been a number of different managers over the time that we've been part of the project. They've all been really great to work with, but it's not so much the staff at Kinachiwanang that we worked with, but community members who are there for the long term. So one of our main community collaborators is Art Hunter, who actually now is back working at Kinachiwanang as an oral history consultant, and they're developing a project, and we're helping with that project, especially my postdoc, Krista Barkley, who regularly is sending sources to Art for the project. I would say another one of the hard lessons is that, I don't know if this is so much of a hard lesson, but it's definitely an organic, as Nick was saying, an organic process to having a digital humanities project, and the people coming in and out of the project change. Our project is very, in addition to being community engaged, it's very student focused. So we have grad students and undergrads working regularly with us. I'll get more into that a little bit later. Another one of the hard challenges is, you're doing a digital humanities project, and we're working with the First Nation, Rainy River First Nations, which is on the border of the United States and Canada. And at this site, the Wi-Fi access is very, very challenging. Internet access is not equitably developed across Canada. And then you also have the added challenge of when you get to this place, your phone. So we have we have the website you can access it on your phone. Once you get there, your phone thinks that you're in the United States and you can't access it. So the whole question of Wi-Fi access and equity, and also just the infrastructural challenges is another issue we haven't sorted out yet. Okay, if you can move to the next one. I'll address briefly the question of Indigenous data sovereignty and community engaged research. This has been a very slow and continually evolving process of how the project has engaged with Rainy River First Nations and Kinachiwanang. I have an Indigenous Anishinaabe student on the, she's almost graduated, Audrey Ochette, on the team, and her mother, Shishigo Goji, who you can see in the middle of that picture there, have come on a number of visits to Rainy River First Nations, and it's been really important to have an Anishinaabe speaker with us as part of the visits, and that's been really, which is, Shishigo is a language speaker, and that's been really important. There's no way we could have done this project without actually traveling there many, many times and continuing to, we were supposed to go this summer. We were supposed to have a workshop at Kinachiwanang in September, which is now not happening, and we will hopefully delay it. But it's definitely an ongoing relationship that continues to change. I also Art Hunter, who I was speaking of before, worked for the project, and we figured out a USW casual contract for him to be paid for that work. And then there's elder honoraria that are part of all of our visits as well. And now we're working on a new letter of intent with Rainy River First Nation Chief and Council around, they're most interested in curriculum resources around Treaty 3 and how this website can help develop curriculum resources that can go into schools and other and higher education places to tell what one of our community members likes to say, the real history of the treaty. Okay, we can go to the next one. In terms of organization, definitely these are grad students, undergrads, and postdocs who flow in and out, but many of these students that you can see here have been working with, there's Annie and Christina on the far, what is that? That's my left. They've been working with the project for a very long time. Annie's been part of it for the beginning, and you can see standing next to me, that's me in the striped shirt, that's Art Hunter, and his wife, Mel Hunter. So the way we organize it is I just try to get as much money as possible so that I can have research trainees, graduate student research trainees, and then hire undergrads either as casuals, or I have them, I've had a lot of students connect with the project through the Research Opportunity Program in Arts and Science and the Research Excursion Program. Highly recommend you go to Vicki Lowe's and her team at Experiential Learning if you're in Arts and Science, because those students get course credit for participating in the project, and they have actually, many of my undergrads who've worked with the project have transformed it in so many important ways. We meet twice a month in sort of lab meetings, and it's really important to have that face-to-face contact. It's challenging these days to do it online, but we figure it out. I do hope that the research trainee approach leads to less of a sort of precarious employment gig economy situation for my students. I know some of them are here on our webinar, and so they might have some other thoughts they would want to add on that. Okay, could you move to the next slide, please? So this, I tried to list all of the places where I get money and where how students earn credits. I was actually going to try and go through and see how many research traineeships I've actually had over the years, but I didn't have time to do that. So I have some funding from the Humboldt Foundation. I have had a number of different kinds of funds from SSHRC. That support pays for multi-year research traineeships for more than 13 grad students. And then also we did hire a special web developer to develop our annotation tool, but other than that, students, and I guess we also had another developer at a certain point too, students have really done a lot of the tech work. Annie Heckman is a genius, and Greg Fuster, who's now graduated, has also done a lot of the tech work with the IIIF stuff, working with the library. Those funding bodies also are what allow me to pay elder honoraria as well. Faculty Arts and Science support has been really key, and there's a list there, but Nick and I were actually part of an earlier version of what was a really great idea, and if we could do that again, I think it would be great. It was what was called the DH Lab, and it supported 2 graduate research assistants who helped integrate undergrads into our lab and to our project, and the undergrads earned course credit. And then there's other support there too. Also, Arts and Science does support my postdoc as well, because like Nick, I have a number of administrative roles. And yeah, I don't know, did I take them just so I could get a postdoc? I don't know, but I'm certainly very happy that I have a wonderful postdoc, Krista Barkley, working with me. So I would say that one of the opportunities that everybody doing a DH project has now is, and it would be great if we could get some support, whether it's from the DH network or libraries, is we're building stuff. We're working on these tools that would be so helpful for the online teaching moment that we are in. And they're research intensive, sort of ethically run projects that I think our colleagues could easily turn to in trying to teach online and with sort of responsible, reliable online sources at this point. It would also be great if the DH network could help us figure out how peer review and DH projects fits in. It worked out for Colin. He got a great job, but I would love for my students to be able to, they do note this website on their CVs, but it would be great if it could be sort of more of a, we have a better peer review process. I see that Elspeth has a comment there. So our next steps are we're working on curriculum guides to amplify the teaching value of the site, and this is something that the Rainy River First Nations really wants us to do. I have another ROP coming up in the fall, and we're working on a broader network with other local museums and regional museums, as well as the ROM and Manitoba Museum, although of course they're all laying off people now, for a Treaty 3 public memory project. So thank you so much.
Fabulous. Thank you, Pamela, and thank you, everyone. So I will stop sharing. So now we are going to break off into sort of Zoom breakout rooms. Some of you are probably familiar with this, but if you're not, you will automatically be spirited away into smaller groups to have some discussion and to chat about everything that we've just seen. So I want folks to do a few different things in these meetings. First of all, this is a good chance to introduce yourselves to each other, maybe just your name, your affiliation, very briefly kind of your interest in DH project management, and then really just to kind of mull over connections and points of interest in each of these three presentations. And again, some of the topics that we've asked our presenters to talk about are around sort of ethical and effective reporting structures within a DH project. How can we resist precarious employment? Again, everybody addressed that. And how can people involved in DH balance their sort of project commitments, which, as everybody noted, can sort of balloon in alarming ways with the demands of their own research and teaching. So those are the kind of issues that we'd like everybody to be thinking about, and folks should feel free to share notes from their own experience, which I think many people, even just from the list of names that I see here, will also have. So you'll automatically be brought back after 20 minutes. I think you can message me in the chat if you have any questions, and I might try to drop in and see how things are going, but I hope you enjoy that, and I will see you back here soon. Everybody is flooding back in from the breakout rooms. I apologize for the slightly musical chairs kind of quality of some of the shifting around, because as the group size changed, I was trying to make sure everybody was in a room with more than one person, because that would be very lonely. So I hope everybody got a chance to at least get to say hello to each other and share a few thoughts. But yeah, I think we should just open things up. We're of a size now where I think folks can either use the raise hand function in Zoom's chat, or they should feel free to just chime in, pipe up, and maybe just say your name so we know who's speaking. And then, yeah, any questions, comments, things you would want to share from that small group at all would be really welcome.
I have a question. I don't know if anyone can see my little hand, though. I don't see the raised hand thing. I just
maybe it's not enabled, but I did see your hand on the screen.
So that's a thumbs up. So I guess, can I jump in?
Yes, please.
So I guess one of the things that I'm interested in is the whole position of the lab manager that Kristen has for the TRU. And I'm wondering, Pamela and Nick, I don't think Colin's on the call anymore, if you all have thought about using that as a model or decided not to, or something you're thinking about, or how you would fund such a person and that sort of thing.
Yeah, one of my research trainees is, we don't call her the lab manager, but she is the collective manager, and she's responsible for communicating with the team and taking notes during our meetings and then sharing them and that sort of thing. And then another member who I think is on our call, or whatever this is, Annie Heckman, is sort of a project lead who is responsible for a lot of coordination with the tech people, but also with the kind of she has deep knowledge of how the site works and also of the the community relationships. She's been a Rainy River First Nations many times. So we do have specific roles in the research traineeships, and those are all paid. Like, so all the graduate students who are part of the project are paid.
Yeah, and we have it. Am I muting it? Right. That's the role of the postdoc who wasn't on the call right now, but in a sense Colin initially, and then Daniel Jameson now. So we don't really have a lab as such, but if there is that kind of coordinator who also is involved in training and has been involved with the project from the beginning, that's been one of the real benefits of having him on as a postdoc in particular.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks.
Our project has a project manager, and she's a senior research, so she has a position as a senior research associate, so she's not a student. And I think she's been with the project for more than 4 or 5 years, so there's a longer continuity to it. But that's also funded by our research grants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, I saw Elizabeth C. had a hand raised. I don't know if you wanted to ask your question.
Hi.
Hi.
So this is a question for Kristen, if she's still on the call. It's hard to tell with these things.
Yeah, she is.
Okay. So I'm really interested in your project because, well, I'm from Alberta and there's a lot of pollution happening here. So I was wondering if there was any opportunities, like, is there a way to, like, expand Pollution Reporter so that it could also be addressing issues, like, across Canada? I guess in my case, particularly in Alberta, where our government isn't very keen on reporting the truth when it comes to pollution?
Yeah, so great question. Thanks for asking. Yes, so right now with Pollution Reporter, we are scaling up. So initially, Pollution Reporter was built for one refinery in Chemical Valley. It's the biggest polluter with 300 chemicals. So it's really long history there too, predates Canada. Now we're scaling up to include all the facilities in Chemical Valley, but the whole thing is that our data set is national. And also there are comparable data sets in the US and Mexico of various other inadequacies, but our whole hope for it and making it open source is that, yes, other frontline communities would take up our infrastructure, would build it out, and, you know, pending funding, it would be really wonderful to build it out nationally.
All right, thank you.
I had not so much a question, but just something open-ended that I'm interested in. I'll take my host's liberties to just ask it now. I mean, I see that we have a number of graduate students and folks who are kind of occupying some of these non-PI positions in DH projects on the call, which I think is really fabulous. I'm just wondering, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but if anybody would want to weigh in at any point just about their own experience, again, some of the questions that we posed to presenters were sort of, how do you put together your tenure file or chair a department or whatever while also managing one of these projects. But I'd be equally curious to hear about what the experience is of trying to do graduate work and how you balance that with this work and then also make this work legible on the job market, which was something that came up a couple of times. So I know, Kristen, you're a PhD candidate. You might be able to speak to that a little bit, but anybody else could also weigh in.
Sure. So I'm really lucky because the lab is such a supportive space and our director, Michelle Murphy, is such an incredible person to work with. And so it is like all of the work I've done is very translatable onto my CV, right? Like, I'm a co-author on the project, as well as a collaborator on the project. And then, of course, all of sort of like administrative experience that you get in a position like this. But I found that it's been helpful to work with people who can have like really open conversations about like what this work looks like for you as a graduate student, and then managing my other workload, because I do like a significant amount of teaching, etc., has been my own personal research and the lab's research share ethics and methodologies. So they share the same theoretical framework of Indigenous feminisms, non-extractive research. And so I think having that mutual buy-in has been very helpful. That the projects are interconnected, I think, would be the biggest part for me.
I can just add to that. I know Pamela mentioned the research trainee structure and how that's been for our team, like rather than having a sort of hourly wage or something like that. And that's been, I think, really key for me because as a graduate student, like many of us, we have different forms of employment that can, we can receive payment in different ways. And when we work in an hourly way, when we're actually building skills, then the better we get, the less we make. And it's like a sort of, it's like there's actually an incentive to slow down if you're in a job that's skill building, right? And so I think the RT contract, it doesn't work for everything, but I think for us it sets up this kind of pillar of trust. And then who knows, like I happen to keep track of my hours, many people don't, but I feel like I always know that if I get sick, I still have my contract. If I have, more time in my schedule, I can do more. So it kind of goes very well with the rhythm of our lives because we sometimes have teaching commitments and things like that. But I think in all, we put more into it because of that trust.
Can I just ask a clarifying question, Annie? So are you saying, are you making a distinction between people who are on a contract, if you will, for a year for X amount of dollars paid monthly versus people who are paid on a timesheet kind of approach?
Yeah, exactly. Because on a timesheet, and I mean, sometimes that does happen for different parts of the project, right? But for many of us, the timesheet model presents a lot of issues because, first of all, if you're in a job like me where I was a project lead and I was answering emails, mm-hmm. I'm clocking in and out for every 2-minute email throughout a day and then thinking about the emails in between. And it's this sort of, you get into a sort of bizarre game when you're actually trying to be part of a more holistic project. So I think that in some projects it doesn't work right because you might have people who fall off and don't do anything. And so there's this kind of, I think for anyone who's running a project, there's something to balance there. But I think for those of us who are highly motivated and who want to be part of something, it's the RT contract sort of sets us up to be just have this extra sustainability to our lives and then stay involved.
Oh, definitely. I personally often will use timesheets for the first time for an undergraduate work-study student and then from there on out. But I never do that with graduate students. But I have heard anecdotally from faculty colleagues that sometimes they've had difficulty getting contracts approved through their business officers who insist on them using these freaking timesheets, which is just a pile of, BS in my viewpoint. But I think the knowledge around how to work around these various rules that seem to vary so much from unit to unit can be spotty. So I think sometimes faculty members don't realize that they have options beyond doing it through the timesheet mechanism.
Yeah, and you'll see all different things like UTGSU sometimes promotes the timesheet model. Like I just saw in the comments the idea that the RT process can be exploitative. And so all of these things can be used in the wrong way. But for us, at least for myself, I think I've always felt really part of a team because of the RT process.
I can second that as well.
That's really good to know. I see Elizabeth Park. That's her virtual hand up. If you want to weigh in.
Hi. I was just wondering if, and apologies if I missed this, I had to step away. Could those be shared? Would Annie and Kristen anonymous, the kind of structure, the language, and Elspeth, perhaps are those boilerplate
yes,
or is that
yes.
project?
It's standard USW casual contracts.
So those could...
No, the research trainee
Oh, I'm thinking about something different. Oh, I don't know about the research trainee. Oh, right, we're talking about something totally different. No, tell us. I don't know about this.
Pamela can speak to it. Maybe.
I So a research trainee is something that you can assign to a graduate, MA student or a PhD student, and basically they get a monthly payment. They don't have to fill in a timesheet. It does have to be work that is in some ways connected to their own work, which I think is the case with all of my students in different kinds of ways. It is, I mean, Annie's right that it requires open conversations about how much work people are doing and an understanding that it may, so when we all go to Rainy River for, 6 or 7 days, that's not something, that's a very intense part of the work. And then other times, other weeks, there may be nothing to do with the project. So it kind of comes and goes, and it really does depend on trust. I don't know if Kristen has another experience of the research trainee approach, but with undergrads, you'd have to hire them as, if you're hiring them as casuals, or I've had a lot of success with the research opportunity program and the research excursion program where students are part of the project, but getting credit for it.
That's super helpful. Thank you. I'm just trying to collect for trying to build a toolbox that will eventually live virtually. So thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question about the RT? So is it a different tax structure for the recipient? Is that the advantage?
Yes, it is.
Uh-huh.
It's
Great.
Box 105 income. So it's
okay.
Monies. Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, I learned something. In addition to all the other fabulous stuff I learned. And a quick question to Pamela about the ROP, the experiential learning students. Does the office or the people that you're working with in Faculty of Arts and Science conceptualize working on one of these DH faculty research projects as an example of experiential learning that a student could be embedded in your project and get course credit for it or what have you?
They do. So I just recently had a term as a Vice Dean undergraduate in Arts and Science, and one of my main goals was to get more humanities colleagues to offer research opportunity program courses. I was not successful. Apparently I was the only humanities faculty member who put in a project for next year, but I'm hoping that more and more people will do so. There have been a number of humanities ROPs over the years, but it's generally, and actually it's a good question because it's a model that works really well for the sciences, but it doesn't seem to be working for the humanities. And so what do we need to do to change? I tried to make a few changes to make it more attractive to humanities scholars, but those didn't seem to work. Yeah, it's clearly, it's the research opportunity program is about doing research. It's not about I think research is experiential learning in my book, but it's not about where or how it happens. Yeah, so anybody who's got a research project and could find ways for undergrads to be involved with it can do a research opportunity program. Then the research excursion program actually funds professors taking students with them to the field or to archives or to wherever, somewhere, as part of a research project.
Cool, thanks. So I'm curious, since we've got so many fabulous people on this call, like what do you all think U of T could be doing, or perhaps the Digital Humanities Network could be doing to more successfully support DH projects at U of T? Are there particular stumbling blocks that you all have encountered either as students working on these projects or faculty members doing these projects or librarians working with faculty members? Oh, there's Kelly's hand. Go for it, Kelly. Oh, and Harriet too.
Hi everyone, I'm Kelly Babcock. I'm the Digital Initiatives Librarian at the University of Toronto Libraries at Robarts Library, previously Scarborough Library. And I've been working with supporting faculty members on DH projects since about 2013. And I think one of the most helpful things that I've seen happening in recent years is sort of starting a project with thinking about how you're going to let it die. And by that, I mean, let the technology die. The data can live on in other formats, but oftentimes, as Colin was saying, you know, the tech part of the projects are sort of an additional project partner, and the research funding is built so that it's not designed for sustainability. It's, you know, it's about building new things and new features. And I think a lot of times having a section in your project plan for an exit strategy from the tech is a really important thing that we as the library have been trying to encourage people to do, and also think through ways that we can sort of gracefully archive projects, because this sustainability in terms of keeping these things live and going and feeding them, it's a bubble and it's going to pop soon. I just wonder what everyone thinks about that.
May I jump in?
Please.
Okay. Thank you, Kelly. I'm a librarian too, but I'm going to speak as a medievalist at this point. And I'm going to speak as someone who's been involved in a digital humanities project for about 20 years. And we have, with my partner, compiled an enormous amount of data and valuable data for other scholars working in multiple disciplines, and over 180,000 digital images of sites, objects, and it's an iconography database. So I have some difficulty with the idea of not sustaining this kind of project. Perhaps there are other types of projects that perhaps you have to think about. I mean, everything gets modified without a doubt, but sustainability is certainly an ongoing issue, whether it be learning new software programs, which is always a steep learning curve, migrating data, et cetera, et cetera. But I think in terms of looking ahead, and I've always thought this, is that somewhere at U of T there should be a hub, because we duplicate so much work on so many projects. It's like reinventing the wheel. And it'd be great. I mean, just the names of sites, historical references. You know, I know that we're dealing with name changes and site changes just as much as someone working in theater or drama. So I think a central hub would be great, where we have a consultation of IT folks who are up to date with the latest programming development, and of course that we try to use as much open source as possible and stay away from proprietary programs, which we know are deadly because they die. It would be helpful, I think, and you know, like a wheel. I'm just throwing it out. That's how I always thought that we might be able to cut costs, share resources, save time. Food for thought.
Well, thank you, Harriet. It raises a really interesting and important question that I've often pondered vis-a-vis U of T and its support for these kinds of projects, which is the relationship between the library and IT and these DH projects, because sometimes it seems like it's a Venn diagram where it doesn't always quite meet fully, and maybe that's true for all these kinds of projects, regardless of what university environment you're in. But I really don't know if that is a challenge that other researchers have encountered, or whether or not the librarians who are here have some perspective on that. Could U of T be doing something different around the IT side of all of what we're talking about, which is not the same as digital scholarship librarians who are working with us on faculty projects?
I think it would require a lot more resources than currently our library system has. I think they're taxed as it is. We're understaffed. So I think, but I know that Kelly, I don't see her anymore, but somewhere in there, she can probably speak better to this. things like this, and I'm not sure if it should always, if it needs to be totally within the library. I think there's some flexible thinking that needs to be thought about this. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know if it is sort of a one department solution, because Elspeth, like you and I were talking about in the breakout room, sometimes the sort of project acceptance and project funding happens in other areas in the university. And I think there could be a sort of coordinated strategy to what does get funded by the university. And maybe that could build upon more of a service model of supporting DH projects rather than these one-off projects that are sort of very separated. Because a lot of them have similar functionality, right? Like they're displaying data, there are images, there are search functionality. So if there was a way to sort of coordinate all of that somehow, that would be great. We're trying to do that in the library. Sorry?
I was going to say, I personally feel that we need a DH lab that is staffed by people, a DH developer who works with IT, who works with the library, who works with faculty, like they have at so many other universities. But in order for that to happen, there needs to be space. And there's space at UTM, there's space at Scarborough, but there's not space yet at St. George. But it is part of the Robarts plan, as you know, moving forward. But I think it'll probably take a while, because I personally think the space is really critical. Like faculty need to be able to know they can go to a location and they can connect with so-and-so who is a humanities PhD but who is tech savvy, who can communicate with them about, you know, various options and possibilities, and where there can be co-working as well, so that you can have what, you know, we've been calling a kind of a collision space, which makes it fun. I mean, the True has that obviously with your lab and a lot, and Pamela and Dechama and some of your larger projects. But imagine, I mean, it's not by accident that all three of those projects are run by very senior and accomplished faculty members. So think about this from the perspective of somebody who's a junior faculty member, you know, coming to U of T, 80,000 students, 3 campuses, you know, it's freaking overwhelming. So this is why I feel really passionately that I need a space that is adjacent to, perhaps even at a particular library space, but is not fully and totally within the library system, because it's not the same thing as what the library does provide. And this is, of course, what many of you know other universities do have. And I do think that we are heading in that direction. It takes a while because it's such a big place with so many different units. And so I'm hoping that we will get there, because it's otherwise it's inaccessible. Doing this kind of work it's hard for people to access unless they have a fair amount of resources and privilege.
Can I just pipe in there briefly?
Please.
Yeah, I fully agree with everyone, even though not everyone's saying the same thing. But I do that, and that's just the nature of this work. For actually a space where people could gather and actually find the resources they need. Early on in our project, we worked with Kelly, and she was really fabulous at helping us see what was possible, but also, as you could just tell from her comment, helping us see what was not possible, which I really appreciated. And I think it also requires, and I'm sure you're doing this as part of your big DH network planning, but we need to have a really capacious understanding of what digital humanities is. And we also need to sort of spell it out a bit, because I think people who are not part of the digital humanities can misunderstand it for a bunch of different reasons, perhaps thinking that it's just, data science with novels, or think that it's, it's not about different kinds of research protocols, as Kristen was talking about, it's not about different kinds of relationships as well, and that it would be great if the DH network could help frame a capacious vision for what, and name a capacious vision for what digital humanities means. I think my grad students, undergrads in humanities, they are really hungry for this kind of work. I mean, it really allows you to communicate your research and build relationships in really powerful ways. And so I think it's not hard to make this argument, but we do have to make it to colleagues who are not humanists and administrators. I'd also want to just say that I find it helpful. I think we're in a pretty good situation in working with IIT, which I think is what Nick works with as well, IIT and the library for support for different kinds of things. And that seems to be working right now. I don't know how scalable that is, though, in terms of, when lots of people want to build their websites and that sort of thing.
Great. Kathy, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. This is an intermediate sort of suggestion. While we're still working towards the goal of this service. One little thing that we could do quite quickly is, could I ask the DHN to host a listserv email list so that if members actually have a question, that we could just put it out onto the email list. Like, I'm just looking at the screen of all these squares of all these people's names. I don't know half the people here. But if everybody subscribed to an email discussion list, at least, I could share some information, and sometimes I don't even know who has the answer, right? And I don't know who to address the question to. So a mailing list, a simple UT listserv mailing list for the DHN would be great. Like, not the newsletter, which is a broadcast list, which is great, but a discussion list.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know if it's one of those.
Easier.
That's what I mean. Like, if you build it, so please. And the other thing is,
a yes.
Okay, great. The other thing is, it just occurred to me that a lot of people have projects and they have their own little space and labs. I wonder if it might be nice to organize some kind like a series of lab tours or project tours.
That's a great idea.
So that people are invited to go, well, when we can actually see each other, or virtually, if it takes forever, to actually, like, here's our space, here's our equipment, here's how much or how little space we have, and just get a really concrete sense of what is the research projects like. It's all kind of abstract right now. You see the website, but you don't really have a sense of the real, what's behind the website. And it might be kind of nice to organize a series of kind of like lab visits or, office project visits.
I think that's a great idea. As I'm chatting in the chat session about drinking while visiting these tours on our lab crawl. I think that's an excellent idea. Yeah, because there are so many, there's so many sites, and, I'm working on this ISI proposal with Andrew right now. And one of the sections is around, the existing facilities and resources. And I mean, I've heard of some of these places. I think I may have seen all of them, but not really. Maybe there's a few I haven't. And of course, it's my job to kind of learn all these places, right? So I do have a bit of insight into it, but I'm sure many of you haven't seen the amazing collaborative and digital co-working research space that Elizabeth overlooks and curates out at Mississauga, which is incredible. Probably a lot of you haven't seen the first floor of what's happening at the library in Scarborough, which is also amazing things there, let alone the planning. I mean, I just had a conversation this morning with Rhonda McEwen, who is the director of the ICCIT out at UTM. And of course, there's a new building planned for Mississauga, and she was telling me about these production studios with a digital storytelling lab and green space and podcasting, like all sorts of like incredible, let's just call it DH 2.0, which is kind of my world of DH, multimedia facilities. So there's a lot of stuff going on, but part of the challenge is, of course, putting it all together in one place. Oh, yeah. Okay, Nick, yeah, let's meet at Victoria. That would be fun.
Well,
Yeah.
Could I say something too? There's a new humanities building that's kind of working at the final stages of the budgetary approval process at 90 Queens Park, and at this point there's room in it that's allocated for the ROM, which the ROM probably can't afford to have. And so, it'd be a great space to try to work towards. I mean, the Robarts is one thing, but this space is supposed to be where the School for Cities goes, where a number of humanities departments go. And, if we keep putting the pressure on, it could be that space does open up. Because at this point, it's an entire floor of a 9-story building. And the convergences that could happen around a place like that would be really great. And Pam knows a lot about this place too, right? It's been kicking around for about 5 or 6 years, and now it looks like it'll finally get off the ground.
I just said it was a good idea in the chat. I'm all with you. Let's make it happen.
Because the problem with I've thought about the Schwartz-Reisman building too, right, which would be an obvious location, but I just think it's too far away. Because people have to cross over Queens Park, and God forbid that would happen. So 90 Queens Park is a lot closer. And so part of what's, I think that's a great idea, but I don't even know how to begin, like who to even lobby for something like that. Like who are the people who make decisions about space for 90 Queens Park?
I know how to do it.
All right.
Let's talk separately.
All right. We'll talk, as they say where I'm from. Okay. Fantastic. Well, you go for it, Andrew.
Sure. So we're nearing the end of the hour. If anybody has final comments, questions, things they'd like to get into this recording, which we're making of this meeting, which will be available at some point in the future, now's the time. And if not, I just want to thank all the speakers. This was really fabulous. It's that kind of behind the scenes look that is like so rare. I hope it was instructive for each of you and maybe helpful to have to go back to those org charts and say, like, how does this actually look on the ground? This was really illuminating for me, probably for you too, also.
Definitely. Thank you so much, everybody, for your participation and for coming, and let's do something like this again.
Yes.
Good. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.